Before I really begin with the story proper today, there's a couple of things I'd like to talk about in brief. First and foremost, one of the things that I really love doing as a GM is what I like to call the safeties, okay? And yes, I basically got that term from Star Trek The Next Generation. The idea being that when you go into a holodeck, there's the concept of having the safeties on, in which case stuff basically isn't allowed to hurt you, or at least not significantly. And then there's having the safeties off, in which case it will make no effort to do so, naturally. The implication should be obvious. You know, if you're playing a campaign with me, I will usually communicate to you openly whether the safeties are on or off. And it's not something that will vary. The way I generally like to do it is I usually have the safeties on at the beginning of a campaign, especially, I want to phrase this specifically to make sure I'm being clear, a campaign. If this is just an adventure or a module or just a one-off or a playtest or whatever, the safeties are almost guaranteed to be off from the word go. But in a campaign, something that is designed to be, excuse me, a long-term investment thing, I really want to ensure that a couple of things happen. First of all, I don't like the idea personally of my players dying a couple missions into what is intended to be a long scope thing, right? As I talked about just yesterday, actually, during my Threshold video, I don't like the idea of a main character death not having significance or meaning. So early on death like that, no, I don't really go for that. Now, that does mean I tend to save the players from their own mistakes or situations or whatever. But that's kind of the nature of that, especially when it's a new setting, especially when it's something that they've never played in before, like, for example, the Primus campaign, which none of these people have ever seen or dealt with before, because, you know, it's mine and pretty much brand new. So, safety's on makes a lot of sense, right? But there are two other reasons why I like to do this. Number one is because if you leave the safeties on for a decent period of time, two things happen. One, the players will get accustomed to the setting and the way things work around here. And two, and more importantly, they will become more invested in their characters. Now, I say that because, yeah, you can... I'm sure very few players go into a situation saying, well, I don't care about this character. Even if they haven't played them much or only played them for a few... for a few things, you know what I mean? Hang on just a second. But my point is that a player who has played a character, you know, who has put some time and effort into making a character, who has played it for a little bit, is going to be different than a player who has put some time and thought into making a character and playing it, and then has played it for several weeks or months or whatever. You know, they're going to be the person is going to be more invested in that character, right? This also ties in with the overall theme of what I'm going to be talking about in a minute, so I'll get to that in just a bit. So, that being said, the other thing I like about the safeties on-off feature is I like to usually coincide when I take the safeties off with something of significance. And this is this session that we're going to be talking about here in just a bit, as soon as I finish my intro, is in fact the session in which the safeties finally turned off in the Primus campaign and will remain off for the duration. That'll be significant in a moment. Let's get to the other side of the coin here. One of the things I've always liked as a writer, well, liked and disliked as a writer, as a GM and whatnot, is that the concept that you have to have some kind of build-up, you have to have some kind of establishment in order to actually have proper payoff with regards to a story or a setting or significance of events or whatnot. You know, for example, I can't just... I could tell you at the beginning of a campaign, the Dyers are bad, okay? To use a specific example. I could tell you at the beginning of a campaign, Tuskers are bad news. And that probably will be something you take seriously, but until you, the player, and you, the character, have actually interacted with and dealt with Tuskers in character and throughout the course of the campaign, you don't actually know that through personal experience. And this is kind of what I'm getting to at here. I've talked about this yesterday again. Man, I talked about everything in that Threshold video, didn't I? But one of the things that I've always felt is that there's a difference between me telling you, okay, for example, in your character, let's say in your backstory you did A, B, and C, okay? It doesn't matter what A, B, and C are, but, you know, you did A, B, and C, right? In my opinion, that does not have the same significance as during the campaign your player did A, B, and C. And the reason why is actually really simple. You, the actual person, the actual player playing that character, have now experienced A, B, and C. You have now experienced, obviously second-hand, or third-hand, or whatever, A, B, and C through your own personal experiences. You actually have that as a part of your memories and your existence and whatever now. It's different to say, well, you know, Tuskers are bad, than to have actually tried to fight one and seen exactly what they're capable of firsthand through your character's eyes, but you, the person, now have this experience. You get where I'm going with this, right? Now, I'm talking about Tuskers specifically because after the course of what the players decide here, they realize that it's very likely that the fire wave that went out, that caused so much damage, which I'll be talking about it more extensively here, is probably came from Aphus Lassel, which they know about because they talked to Aulenton Guskakan way back during their second adventure, and they are pretty sure that Tuskers are going to be there, and they were terrified of this. And it was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted as a GM. I wanted them to understand what they were getting into. I wanted them to feel that dread, that, you know, terror of the idea of going to an entire island filled with these monstrosities. And I didn't even have to emphasize this. It was actually really awesome that the players themselves figured it out on their own and figured out the significance of this. So many of the players spent some time trying to figure out a way to convince themselves or to convince their characters not to go, because they desperately wanted not to go, even though they believed their characters would actually fight for the right to go. If you know where I'm going with this, it was so awesomely done. It worked out so beautifully. I loved it. And that's basically exactly what I was hoping for when it comes down to it. And like I said, that's when the safeties came off. And I did that specifically to further emphasize this situation and further emphasize you guys, you know, if anything goes wrong, it's on you, because, hey, guess what? Yeah, okay, this is it. Sorry, just looking something up really quick. So, that being said, before they go, several things happened. I mentioned the wave of fire energy that erupted from Aphus Lassel. One of the things I really wanted to do was I wanted to have a general sense of scope demonstrated to the characters, because I wanted to see how they would react to the knowledge of exactly the full nature and extent of the disaster. It ended up working out very well, actually, all things considered, because, well, let me put it to you this way. The very first thing they encountered, Rory actually specifically encountered, was he met a single elderly dwarf, right, who was blind from the explosion and flailing around in pain and desperately asking for help. And Rory just looks at him like, I have no idea what to do with this or how to deal with you, and runs off, you know, refusing to deal with the situation. Now that was pretty much exactly what I wanted to happen, because I wanted to start with the personal level, because the next thing that happens as Rory's running off is he looks around and he notices that there are, in fact, you know, hundreds upon hundreds of people around here who are in the exact same condition. And as he thinks about it, he realizes that there are thousands upon thousands, and that's just in the local area, because this thing tends to hit the entire continent. It was an excellent way to get across the full depth and breadth of the disaster, and I feel like the players did a really good job of properly emphasizing and understanding the significance of these events. So the players all reconvene back at the facility, the Anetheron facility. Now, Zeiss had decided to be in the Anetheron facility while he was in the previous night and while the explosion hit. The way I described it was that Zeiss was so completely consumed by nightmarish pain that he literally didn't even realize he was in pain at first, that it did not even occur to him until he realized that that screaming was actually coming from his own mouth. And when he collapsed to the ground, he was so exhausted from having screamed nonstop for however long and from being just shuddered to death that he could barely move. So the party goes in, and the very, very first thing they notice is the facility, instead of being cold and almost pitch black, is fully lit and has, and then there's thrum of energy and pulses in the background and all sorts of things. The facility is obviously on now, in other words. As they rush in, I'm sorry, I actually missed a step here. I apologize. The very first thing they do is they open the door, and this backlash of energy comes flying out and nearly knocks Snarg out, unconscious, actually. Then, the next thing that happens is Zeiss is released because the energy finally stopped reverberating around his skull. And then they go in, find the facility on, they find Zeiss. Now, they kind of need to reconvene, and Zeiss and Snarg aren't exactly in a good shape, so they head towards an area that's labeled as the local garden. The local garden is built in a very similar way to the garden, which I mentioned some time ago. The players haven't been there yet. Actually, these players, I should say. But regardless, it's a place of strange foliage and lots of grass, lots of trees. The place is very healing and restorative. And if you just kind of rest down, the grass will literally lift up to support you and make you nice and comfortable. All that fun stuff. And it looks like it's daylight in there, even though there's obviously a ceiling somewhere. You just can't see it. It just looks like it's daylight. So they go in there and they start talking. A lot of things happen. Forgive me for skimming over it as usual because it was some awesome role-playing, but there were two real problems that really arose. First of all, Fear Seal told everyone, look, this is what's happening. This was another ley line being erupted. That means it was caused by Gerlin, just like the previous tour. That means Gerlin is over there, and that means I'm going after him. Who's coming with me? And a lot of the party was very torn on, as I mentioned before, going straight to a place where the Tuskers are very likely to be found. But one of the other things that immediately came up before they really started talking about this is, what do we do about the people up top? There are a lot of injured, a lot of sick, and a lot of dying up there. And we have a room that heals you just for walking into it. Now, several party members, including most vocally Snarg, were very much in favor of the idea of bringing down, as many as they could, basically, in here to get them healed, to get them taken care of, that sort of thing. Some of the party members, including Rory, most vocally, were very much against that idea because of the long-term risks of exposing this facility and what was in here to the rest of the outside world. Snarg's basic idea was that he didn't care about trying... He didn't want to do the cold calculus thing. He wanted to try and help as many people as he could. And Rory's idea was that he believed Snarg was acting out of just impulsive emotion or whatnot and wasn't actually thinking the situation through. And therefore, they couldn't be allowed to jeopardize everything just to save a few lives, which don't actually matter. And so forth and so on. The argument got pretty heated between the two of them. I kind of skimmed over one fact because it wasn't relevant until now. But while they were down there convening, the Timidians showed up again. And by again, I mean actually for the first time, really. It met with Snarg briefly earlier, but this is the first time it actually encountered the party. And they asked a few questions of the Timidian and tried to get some exposition out of it. Kind of failed, mostly because it didn't want to give them more information than they already had, because it didn't trust them. The problem was, based on everything that they had encountered between the 11 and the group, the very clear distinction was that the 11 did not like the group, that they felt that the group was not in serving of their best interests, and trying to help them or assist them would only make things worse rather than better. And the Timidian explained this to the group in some detail. In further simulation of that, when it came back, one of the things they requested of it was to go ahead and dispose of all the Tusker mines, the devices that Gerlin had invented, that had already affected Rory and Ariguna. It went back, disposed of all of them within a matter of minutes, I might add. Oh, a few thousand of them came back, and it came back just about the time at which Snarg and Rory had literally drawn weapons and were actually about to start physically attacking each other. In response to this, it told them flat out, this is the kind of reason why we cannot trust you with this sort of thing. You are so contentious, even amongst yourselves, that this is not something we can allow or support or condone or tolerate. Now, Coulson tried to tried to explain this situation to the Timidian. Failed miserably, I might add, but he did try, because the Timidian did not understand the concept of people who are... put simply, in the Timidian's mind and the mind of the 11, if you are together, you're together. You don't have contention amongst each other. If you have contention, then you are not together, and therefore not trustworthy, basically. So, at some length, they finally get it to agree to go ahead and give them the ability to translate to Aphus Lassel quickly and promptly. However, there is one huge bombshell that is dropped just before that, because Zeiss decides to ask the creature who killed the Green Mages 14 years ago. Now, for those of you who don't remember that particular plot point, I'll rehash it very briefly for you. 14 years ago, a massive accident or horrible incident or something happened where a huge amount, hundreds of thousands of Green Mages died across the entire continent simultaneously. And to this day, they're still not even 100% sure what happened or why or anything like that. And at that same point in time, something happened on Vasey and Lassel, which created what they called the dead wastes. It's this perfect sphere of dead land where the land does not grow and there's no life there or anything like that. And there's a couple other consequences of this event that you, of course, don't know about. Long story short, the Timidian answers without hesitation or even having to look up the information. It tells Zeiss that the Pinnacle was responsible for this. Now, if you don't remember that name, the Pinnacle is what the Nightmare claimed to be a part of earlier. And similarly, the Pinnacle has also been name-dropped a few times, mostly by the 11 in general, with regards to an organization that had a great deal of resources and information and clout across the entire continent. They don't have any details, of course. Zeiss was completely taken aback by this, for various reasons, which I'm not actually 100% sure I'm at the liberty to share. But long story short, with that particular information shared, Zeiss's character started to change a little bit, and that was kind of a bombshell for the party. Ugh. God. So they went ahead and got themselves together, spent the night, rested up, and when they went back to the quarry, to the entrance place, and sealed up the door with a soul bind in order to ensure that nobody could go in there except for those who have the particular soul tuned to it, which included Millie of Great Gear and Arcweaver, Ogren, who was the third of the exchange, Zeiss, and I believe Snarg also was in there. Any of the party members in general. They were all there, and they all got soul-bound, and the door was made, and everyone else turned to leave, including Zeiss, I might add. Zeiss decided not to go with the party to Aphus Lassel, for good or for ill. I guess we'll find out, won't we? But the long and the short of it is Zeiss decided that it would be suicide to go to Aphus Lassel, which he is not interested in, and he wanted to start really working up the exchange so he could use it as a weapon to point at the Pinnacle for his own personal reasons. Now, once they'd left, they realized that for some reason the quarry was completely empty of people, even though there should be a few hundred refugees in here, and after a moment they realized that's because the Timidian had cleared them out, at which point the Timidian actually showed up and began summoning a portal which they could move through. Now, as the Timidian was summoning this, they started talking about a few of their plans and plots and what they were going to do next. Give me just a moment here. There's the reach-arc thing. I wanted to actually share this specific thing. Now, as they were going, they got into a bit of an argument with Rory. Justified, in my opinion, though. Rory was trading this rather casually, and both Coulson and Fearnesil and Snarg, actually, all basically kind of jump on Rory and say, look, we know you like to mouth off at people. We know you like to be all the big tough man. But if you do that to a Tusker, you're going to get us all killed. So why don't you just keep your mouth shut and try to be polite and diplomatic for once? Because this time, this is for real. And Rory, ironically, would not let the point go. He just kept biting back at them. He was very upset about this situation. So they were actually debating for a bit, leaving Rory behind because of this. But in the end, Rory agreed to go ahead and be quiet about the things, and he'll just be still. Oh, Javan was also someone who jumped on him about this. Now, the Timidian left them with a simple quote. This is the thing I was wanting to look up specifically. It is highly unlikely you will ever encounter us again. In case I didn't mention it, the Timidian actually took the it should be right here. The there it is. The eight-sided crystal from them, and said, you know, it didn't actually say anything. It didn't have to. The significance of the gesture was well understood. We are withdrawing our support of you, and it was only allowing this one last act as basically a favor. So they go ahead and touch the spinning violet disc which is hovering in the air and feel their entire body lurch forward as though gripped by your navel and yanked. As they rip by sights and sounds that they barely understand, they catch glimpses of corridors of pure violet crystal, bright lights of blindingly red glare, and strange dancing lights of blue and teal flickering. All of this blurs by you at breakneck pace before you suddenly feel as if you are slammed into a concrete wall and blink your eyes in the brightness. It takes you a moment to realize that it is both brighter and much colder than you were expecting. The bright sunlight combined with a relative lack of cloud cover is reflecting off long, sloping hills and valleys of partially snow-covered tundra as far as you can see before you. There is a light breeze whipping through you which might feel pleasant if not for the bitter cold, and there are several pine trees forming the vaguest edges of a forest to the south, which, in addition to stopping the worst of the winds, are probably sheltering you from prying eyes for the moment. The ground itself is a very unusual combination of loose, fertile soil and frost, yet does not give underneath your steps as you walk upon it. Where it is not covered by snow or ice, the partial tundra soil makes an odd reflective glittering effect that gives you the impression of walking through planes of glass with bright lights flickering everywhere. The trees themselves are even odder, and upon closer reflection you realize that they are both tall and wide, made of a sort of crystalline substance in the shape of bark, but clearly not, that fluctuates in the sunlight between pink, blue, and red. Similarly, the leaves on the trees are in striking contrast, and it's not until you get closer you realize each individual leaf is in fact on fire, although the crystal leaf beneath the flames seems unharmed by the flickering flames. I wanted to read that specifically because I was actually rather pleased with the overall visual of what this place looks like. Now, in case you're paying attention, there's nothing here. There's no, they were so tense about what was going to happen, that they were going to pop in and there were going to be tuskers everywhere and there was nightmare. What I then did was for the next several sessions had basically nothing happen. They're in this completely empty terrain. They don't even hear birds or bugs or anything like that. It is incredibly quiet. And all they can hear is the whistling of the wind going through these obviously artificial trees. Now, the trees themselves, after some examination, they realize are not truly artificial. It's more like they were they're artificial in the sense that if you, proper husbandry is artificial in real life. Obviously, this was artificially encouraged to grow in this way. Nevertheless, this did naturally grow in this way, if you understand where I'm going with that. So, Rory decides, for whatever reason, to pick up one of the leaves and go ahead and bite into the end of it. The leaf itself tastes actually really good. However, then the flames jolted through him and actually knocked him back to the ground, and his tongue was stunned, so he started talking like this for quite a while. Numb tongue. Anyways, so as they're examining this place, they try to get their bearings and figure out what's going on, but all they can decide is that they're near a coast, right next to a beach, basically, and they're on the northern edge of whatever this island is, probably Aphus the Cell. And after a while, Snarg notices a creature which is watching him. It is a reed shark, a single reed shark. Now, the reed shark just kind of moves a little bit close, but it keeps its distance, and it'll actually keep pace with the group as they're traveling. It also looks a lot different than any reed shark they've ever seen before. I mentioned dark mottled skin, slightly offset rear legs, and a much taller dorsal fin, which makes it look larger than it actually is. It made virtually no sound on approach and just continued to follow with them for a while. Several of the party members actually recommended killing the thing, but Snarg immediately shot that down because he believed, based on the way it was acting, it was a scout of some kind. And as a result, killing someone's scout was not something he was either in favor of or recommended. He felt that would just make things worse. And he was right. But anyways, so as they continue to travel southward, basically encountering nothing, they realize that there's actually, more and more of these things are showing up. Until it gets to the point there's about 5 reed sharks, which are just kind of walking along there. Now, I want to actually go ahead and quote Snarg here, because this is probably one of the best in-character realizations of just how serious this situation was. Look, if we get into a fight, there's no way I can think of that we will come out on top. Just fighting one Tusker will be the end. Period. We couldn't even take the child we met before if it had decided to fight him for some reason, let alone a full-grown one on this island. And there is no reason to be fighting anyone anyway. We haven't done anything. They haven't done anything. Sending a scout doesn't mean someone wants to kill you. Trust me, I've been a scout most of my life. Killing a scout is going to bring someone's rage down on you. Hard. And in a place like this, where we don't know the land, we don't have the weather, we don't have the people, we have nowhere to go but feet up if we start anything. You understand? And then he goes back to it. And he was also, his tone was quivering the whole time he was doing that. Forgive me for not really pulling it off across. But yeah, he understood the severity of the situation significantly. So as they're traveling along, people message me. After a while, they encounter a valley. I can sort of visually demonstrate this, but this valley is absolutely gargantuan. It's about the size of the Sacramento Valley, if you happen to know what I'm talking about. Put simply, you know, it's not a valley in the absolute sense, but you know, it's just kind of a sloping down kind of thing like this, and then it goes straight like this for quite a ways down there, and they're like at the northern end of the tip here, and the valley is huge. Like I said, Sacramento Valley. So the only reason they can even tell that it ends over there is because they can see the mountains on the far distance, right about at that point. And there is nothing they can see down there. There's no trees. There's no buildings. It looks like just plains of snow as far as the eye can see. And so they're really, really hesitant about heading down into that valley. So they decide, rather than head into that valley, they're going to go ahead and head west. So they start to head west, at which point the reed sharks stop following them. Now, Snarg immediately stops, and he's like, wait a minute. Either we just entered their territory or left their territory, or we went somewhere they didn't want to, you know, actually... You know, we've entered some... this is a problem, in other words. This is a problem. And so he, by himself, starts to go back towards the reed sharks, which is actually really funny because the next thing that happens is this massive trap springs up out of the ground. Now, I'm going to try and describe this as best as I can. Here's the... you know, if this is kind of a roughly box-shaped thing, and here's the ground, it came up straight up out of the ground and just rooshed up. It was like 30 feet into the air. Now, there was no ceiling or roof to this, but the lines of the box up here had these jagged, sharp spikes on them, and the steel itself was, I think, about 3 feet thick, give or take. It was extremely thick and very durable, and as they examined it, they realized that it was very likely this was designed as a trap for beasts and other strong creatures like that. Probably something a little bit more than the party. The only one on the outside of it happened to be Snarg. Now, Snarg immediately pulls out his rope and hook and latches it up to the spikes and starts crawling up in order to get people out of there. But he's about halfway up when he notices that there are several figures approaching, humanoid figures, and that's all he gets. They're way in the distance, but he sees them coming, and he's like, and he has a choice to make, and he decides he's going to go and, you know, scurry back down, and he's going to go and talk to them. Hang on just a second. Now, as he goes to talk to them, they, well, okay, I kind of got to pause for a moment, because that's actually how that particular session ended. Now, the reason I have to pause like that is because from this point on, we stopped using the forums. That was literally the exact moment at which the forums we stopped using as our method of playing D&D. From that point on, we started using various methods of voice chat, starting out with roll d20, which ended up sucking horribly, and we ended up finally abandoning. And from in more recent times, we started using Ventrilo to do it. And I just gotta say, I actually really like the voice chat D&Ding a lot better. It's a lot smoother, it's a lot easier. Things tend to go by swiftly, you know, rather than spending forever on a single thing. You know, stuff gets done. Overall, it tends to work really well, and I just felt like mentioning that really quick. So, from this point on, there are no actual specific written things I can go through and actually read, just summarizations that I wrote of the events that happened on chat. So, next thing that happened is, as the humans showed up, after a while, Snarg started asking them things in every language he knew, but ironically, the language they did know was common. And so they look at them and they're trying to understand with him, and they've never seen something called a knoll before, and they have no idea what to do with a knoll, and so they're looking at him weird and trying to deal with him, and they go ahead and deactivate the trap, at which point they find all the other people in there. And they see Rory, and they rush up and say something to Rory, you know, and Rory's like, huh? Common, please? And they're like, what? And finally they started asking exactly where he's from, at which point he responds with he's from Visay and Lassel, and they immediately act with a degree of concern about that. Now, every now and again, my players will be in a situation where things could go very, very badly if they don't deal with the situation in a certain way. What ended up is a 23-foot-tall, golden-furred tusker came thundering in at incredibly rapid speeds, picked up Rory specifically, who was squirming furiously and trying to fight back, lifted him all the way up to eye level, and demanded, in a very deep and horrible voice, Are you from Visayan Lassel? Rory, wisely, decided to answer honestly, at which point the Tusker sniffed him out and decided he was telling the truth, and went ahead and lowered him back down and said, all right. And what happened next, you'll forgive me for not going into full detail, because I went into a lot of detail. But suffice it to say, they went ahead and called in their transit in order to go ahead and get out of here. What shows up is what I described to the party as an airship, even though it didn't look like any airship they'd ever seen. It was making a hellacious amount of noise and had rotating blades keeping it up in the air. And it was also pretty large, all things considered, obviously, because it has to be able to house Tuskers. I'll just go ahead and tell you guys, to give you a general idea. If you've seen the helicarrier in the Avengers movie, you have a pretty good idea of the general size of this thing. So this thing shows up and lands, and the party goes ahead and gets on board, along with the Tusker and the humans with them. And they start discussing what's been going on. As they were going, Coulson and Guido both combined their efforts to figure out what's going on with this, and they realized that this thing was not woven. And furthermore, the way it was designed, it was made as though it was made in a mold, one that was designed so it could be replicated many times and over, kind of like what you do with weapons and armor. But the idea of having a mold for something that is this massive and this complicated is beyond the idea of what they were dealing with. I mean, the actual airships, the actual things of this scale that they make, they weave, and they do so individually, if you follow me. So there's no such thing as just mass-producing something like this, especially without weaving at all, because there's not even a trace of magical energy within this thing. Another thing that happened, airships tend to magically negate momentum. It's one of the reasons they're able to maneuver the way they are. This thing had no momentum canceling whatsoever. It just lurched up, and so the whole party was, thrown to the ground because they were completely unprepared for it. Of course, the humans and the Tuskers with them were just fine, because they were ready for it, but the party, it's another just thing to emphasize the point here. I'm just going to quote something my sister mentioned here. The ride felt like being in a fighter jet with no seat and no harness, as it did stunts everywhere. As they were traveling, Tusker decided to try and engage... Snarg tried to engage the Tusker in conversation. This is when they got their first peek into the Tusker mindset and mentality. One of the things they learned is that the Tuskers found genuine enjoyment and entertainment in, of all things, debate and discussion. And they were extremely well-spoken and extremely technologically advanced, and they had never heard of magic, ever. There was not a trace of magical aptitude in their people or anything like that. They have never heard of, they actually thought that Snarg was joking when he started talking about, the ability to mend wounds with your hands, and he just, oh, yeah, sure, whatever. Kind of like if someone here in real life had told you that they had the ability to, lift a building with their mind. That's basically the response these Tuskers would give to him, would be like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever. Maybe if you had a forklift, or not a forklift, you get what I mean. And they find out that these Tuskers have... I'm going to go and skip ahead a little bit, because they learn a lot about Tusker history and culture and whatnot. Their form of entertainment, like I said, I want to re-stress this because this is important, is debate and discussion. They enjoy talking with each other. They enjoy talking about things. And this shows in every single interaction they have with the party. Anytime the party talks with them or even asks them a simple question, it turned into this massive conversation, and the party had to try and cancel it and be like, no, look, stop, because we just wanted a simple answer, because they want to talk about things constantly. The Tuskers... had this air of almost intense politeness about them. And, they would discuss things with him. It turns out that these people have been on Aphus Lassel for as long as they can remember, which is at least a few centuries. And they also don't really know how to deal with certain things. I'll get to that more in a second. What happens is they are taken to one of the Tusker cities. You may have been wondering where exactly these people live. All of the Tuskers and humans all live together in harmony, by the way, in underground cities, of which there are 23 at the moment. They're actually in the process of building another, or getting ready to produce another city on the moon, actually, right now. So, they go into this massive underground cavern, and there are buildings built into the walls, into the ground, and into the ceiling, and all of them just kind of create this pattern, this lattice of like looking into a geode. And it's all incredibly well designed, incredibly well engineered, and well thought out. And there's tons of room for the Tuskers, who are massive. I want to stress this guy that they're with, the 23-foot tall. He is actually a young one. He is a teenager in relative equivalency. There are 50-foot tall Tuskers. There are 100-foot tall Tuskers. You know, it depends on the color of their fur, and I make a point of emphasizing this as we go along. Generally, the darker the fur, the bigger they are. A true black fur is the 100-foot monstrosities, and then you have silver fur, and so forth and so on. And yes, that is partially based on Acheron's Call, I'll admit it, but I have my other reasons for doing that as well, which I won't go into here. So, as they're going through, you know, they see, you know, these brown furs and these dark red furs, and they're just like, wow, my God, this is incredible. And they're just talking and learning about all this stuff. And the Tuskers insist on taking them to this pyramid-shaped building where they have an analysis facility. And the party's like, well, why are you taking us here? Well, we need to understand more about you and what it is you eat, what it is you need from your society in order to properly acclimate you to living here on Aphus Lassel. To which the party's like, huh? This is where things get kind of interesting. It turns out that there have actually been visitors from another world or another dimension. The Tuskers have never actually fully been able to decide on that. That have been happening semi-regularly for, again, centuries. It is not uncommon for people outside Aphus Lassel to just kind of pop in randomly. Some of these creatures are big and mean and horrifying. After some discussions, they realize, based on what they learned from Aulatungusk Khan and you know, some of the description of the creatures, it's very likely that something in the Dyers was actually connecting to Aphus Lassel, and therefore creatures from the Dyers were occasionally coming out to Aphus Lassel. Now that serves two purposes. One, it's foreshadowing, obvious. But two, it also emphasizes the general capacity of these Tuskers. The fact that they are able to handle things coming from the Dyers at all really speaks to their advancement and their strength. So they lead them to this facility, and this place is just coated with blood. Like it's kind of dried off, but you know it's kind of unpleasant. And they're like, "Oh my God!" And there's these horrible hooked-looking things and all that fun stuff. And the party's like, "Oh my God!" And the Tusker's like, "Don't worry, don't worry. Those are there for the more unpleasant creatures we have to analyze. It's, you know, you guys have been very amiable. I doubt that'll be a problem." And they're like, "Oh, okay." I have to throw this joke in. It was literally a throwaway joke. It kind of became a running gag. Javan, as you may or may not remember, is a fairy fighter. And so he goes in, and the machine tries to analyze him and fails. The machine cannot determine his biology, his species, cannot classify him. That is also foreshadowing, but the other important part is the Tusker operating the thing, I'm sorry, actually the human operating the thing turns to him and says, "What are you?" And Javan says, "Well, I'm a fairy." And the human says, after a moment's thought, "Sir, I don't really care about your sexual orientation. I'm trying to understand your species." It was a dumb joke, but it kind of came up a few times after that and kind of became a small running gag there. Anyways, it didn't know how to classify Javan for whatever reason. So they finally just gave up and said, "Screw it, we'll deal with you later." Then they put Fear Seal in the analysis thing. And the moment they did, the entire facility went berserk. Every single alarm in the entire facility went off simultaneously. All of those massive hooked blades and things I just mentioned immediately came down to grasp at Fear Seal. The Tusker who was escorting them, in a panic, immediately picked up the entire party and goes thundering out the wall outside as fast and hard as it can. And the party's like, "No, God, wait! No, stop! We have to go back and save her!" And the Tusker thunders out of the room. Turns around, and you know, the entire facility is literally being closed off and shut down. And the party immediately goes up and tries to start bringing their way in. And some officials come up and say, "What's the problem?" And they're like, "Oh my God, Fear Seal is in there. We have to help her." And they realize they're talking about the individual, you know, the person that caused all those alarms. And they're like, "Okay, sir, don't worry. It's okay. We're going to take you someplace where it's safe, all right?" And they're looking at him like, "What are you talking about? No, we have to go help her. You don't understand." And, "Yes, help her. If you come with us, we'll try to help her." And after a while, it gets to the point where one of the party members, I believe Rory, actually goes to attack them, either out of frustration or to try to get something done. And they end up getting stunned as a result. And the rest of the party's like, "Okay, we'll go ahead and go with you. Whatever." Now, I actually spent a while building this up, and I was really pleased with how it turned out. The party keeps interacting with these people, humans and Tuskers both, and the attitude the humans and Tuskers are showing them is all very clear. It is a combination of fear and pity and a degree of understanding and the desire to help them, the genuine desire to help them, mind you. They're constantly like, we can help you, we can understand this, And the Snurg's like, right, so you have to understand that Fear Nacelle is not a threat. Right, she's not a threat. Okay, that's, we can start with that. So because you think she's not a threat, you are willing to accept the thought that maybe for the moment she should be dealt with separately, until we can assure ourselves that you are no longer being manipulated by her or controlled by her or whatever, and so forth and so on. I wasn't quite that overt with it. It was actually really funny to me because a lot of the party members started getting, in character I should say, really pissed off at the Tuskers and the humans as a result of this whole thing, which I found fascinating because to me their situation seemed so understandable. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead and give you just a bunch of info dump here, if I may. Tuskers and humans both, for whatever reason, and they've never actually figured out why, are incredibly susceptible to mind control from scions. And when I say incredibly susceptible, I mean, in game terms, they can't roll a will save in order to prevent it. Anything else gets a will save. Anything else is a check. But humans and Tuskers, it's just automatic. And one scion could control 100 Tuskers or humans without even trying. Possibly even more than that. Actually, probably more than that. So the people here, the humans and the Tuskers, know what scions are, know how to detect them, and have been on very, very high alert for them for literally centuries, just in case any happen to show up, because they are absolutely terrified of what that would mean. And they use such extreme measures to combat them because they know that literally all it would take is one scion getting in there to completely destroy their entire society. And that's why they're acting the way they are. They believe the party are other victims of the scion, of this character, Fear Nacelle. Now, based on that information, you probably understand that there's no real way that which they're going to make a halfway point. In fact, I actually didn't expect the party to be able to talk their way out of this situation. However, Snarg came up with an awesome idea. First, however, I want to mention something. While they were there, they were allowed to access several of the books that they had, and Snarg found one in particular, thanks to a really lucky dice roll. And because he is the one person who's been infused with psionic knowledge at this point, and the ability to read and speak and all that psionic, he actually understands that it was written by a scion, which he was very confused by, and the scion who wrote it was posing as someone else and laid down the basic tenets of history and culture for the Tuskers and humans centuries ago. And the one thing it emphasized over and over was that scions were horrible, evil, dangerous creatures that were supposed to be dealt with utmost caution and whatnot. So all of this attitude of fear also came from a scion, which is interesting in its own right. Meanwhile, Snarg meets with after this happens, he and the rest of the party meet with several representatives, and the human finally, basically out of fear, doesn't want to be in the building with them anymore, so they go ahead and get a silver fur in. Pretty big Tusker, all things considered, and a pretty high up one. And the silver fur continues to try and negotiate. However, they realize that not only there's a couple of things that are problematic. First of all, the analysis facility isn't there anymore. This does not help the situation. What they learn is that there is now a perfectly spherical hole where the analysis facility used to be. And I tried to describe this, and I failed apparently, because not all the players actually got this. Again, this is one big underground city, right? Now, the analysis facility was up against a wall over here. A pyramid shape right up here, okay? Well, instead of this pyramid, instead of chunks of the wall, there's now just this perfectly spherical hole here where the analysis facility and part of the hole and part of the wall and part of the ceiling used to be, if you follow. Now, the leader of this particular city had planned to self-destruct the entire city as a desperation measure, and they had already actually evacuated most of the city already as a result of this whole thing. Now, the party, and again, Snarg really gets credit for this a lot, he tried to negotiate a bit of a compromise. If we capture Fear Nacelle unconscious, that will be shown as proof that we aren't mind-controlled by her, because otherwise we wouldn't be willing to do this just to delist, and this way you can save the city. The Tusker went ahead and agreed, even though actually I could think of 3 arguments right off the top of my head about why that wouldn't work, but the Tusker went ahead and agreed because I wanted to give the party some kind of a bone. So they were given exactly 10 minutes before the detonator would be pushed, and the entire city would be destroyed along with them, and they would die horribly. And I basically, obviously, 10 real-life minutes didn't go by, but I basically kept kind of a mental track of the timer, and I just kind of emphasized it to the party every now and again as they were debating what to do and how to do it. I'd just be like, 5 minutes left, and they'd be like, oh god, okay, okay, you know. So they go find this sphere-shaped hole, just like I said, and they find that there is this very powerful kitten. Behold the power of the kitten. And they find this a huge amount of elemental energy that is just erupting from this spot. Elemental energy that is primarily of fire. No, it isn't. I'm sorry. It is primarily of water and earth affinity is what the kind of energy it is. Okay, I'll let you go. Go ahead. You're free. And they're not really sure what to make of it, and they try to come up to it, and they realize Firnasil is actually inside of that energy, thanks to Snarg's ability to sonically link with her. And she can't tell what's going on or what. She has no idea what's happening. Scritch, scritch, scritch. And so they decide to try and go ahead and convince her to try and absorb the energy. Go ahead. There you go. Into herself, in order to dissipate it, and they emphasize upon her the severe nature of the situation and get her in there, and then they're like, look, we're sorry, but we have to knock you out, it's part of the deal, and she's like, okay, whatever, and so Rory clubs her, and she goes down unconscious, and they're all looking around like, okay, now what? Wait, we have to contact them, because they'd given them a communicator, and Star's like, we got her, oh god, please. And they're just waiting there. Now, out of character, I'll go ahead and tell you, they had 40 seconds to spare when that happened. I was actually keeping track down to the 10th seconds at that point in time. But what actually happens is the timer ticks over to the point when, the time would be up, but then the city is not destroyed, and, a couple more minutes pass, and the entire party is like, whew. And then several guards show up, obviously military of some kind, and take Firnasil with them. And they take them to meet a gentleman whose name I meant to look up for this. Pardon me just a moment. I have a whole list of names just so I can keep track of my own NPCs, because I'm so bad with names. Thompson. Delegator Thompson. He's a human. And he is someone who has been... who is basically exactly what it sounds like. They don't really have a leadership outside of the military, obviously, on Aphus Lassel. It's more like their entire society is sort of a commune, and I know that sounds weird, but that's basically what it comes down to. So he is literally, his title is indicative. He is a delegator. He's not someone who actually gives orders. He's just someone who kind of tries to keep things organized. They decide to take him to him because they don't know how else to take these people to. And they try to go ahead and, They try to go ahead and impress upon him what they're doing here. Now, Coulson decides to go ahead and roll diplomacy, but here's the thing. I've always been weird about being this as a GM. Sometimes, if you want to just roll diplomacy and say, I am convincing, I'll go ahead and let you do that. Sometimes, if you say, I want to actually say what I'm going to say, I will decide if you're convincing based on what you say. And sometimes, if you do both, I'll usually debate it based off one or the other. Now, Coulson was doing well in his diplomacy rolls, but he was actually trying to convince the guy. And Coulson kept insisting that Firnasil was a good guy, which, of course, the guy was completely unwilling to accept. It was so fundamentally against everything he knew, quote-unquote, as part of his history. So after a while, they finally managed to make the merest amount of effort on this guy, and basically got the impression across that Gerlin, who was here, was a rogue scion, and therefore they wanted to take him out with this scion. And from his perspective, it's two scions duking it out, and his idea is that at least the two of them would cancel each other out, and then get the hell off his island. So he went ahead, and after a bit, decided to go ahead and give the party leeway to go ahead and go with an elite team and a helicarrier off to, that's not what I was actually calling him, but I'm just so you understand what I'm talking about, and a helicarrier to go to a particular facility where they believe that the scion Gerlin probably is. How long have I been recording so far? God, we just now got to the 50 minutes? Wow, really? I'm going to go ahead and cover this next section in some detail here, okay? First and foremost, this place is a sanctum where they're going, okay? Now, if you don't know the term, it's because this is actually the first time it's really been name-dropped. But on Visayan Lassel and Mary Lassel and Aphus Lassel, and yes, that's approximate positions here, There are these sanctums that were built for the scions there. It's the temples they went into in Lassel towards the beginning of the adventure, and the ones that they found on top of the plateau in Lassel. So sanctums are places that were built by the scions for the scions. Guido decides to talk technology with these people for a while they're resting. He learns that the Tuskers and the humans here, many years ago, centuries ago, had found a way to break into this sanctum, rather violently, I might add, and had worked in there and found something that the scions had been working on. It was an infinitely replenishable energy source they called core energy. Now, they learned how to use this power and harness it to power their entire society, because even a very small core, hell, even a core that's about this size would be able to power an entire city for years. And, well, actually, I guess infinitely, really, as long as the city doesn't expand, is my point, because obviously it's self-replenishing. So the party is very confused in their own right as to why the scions would have this energy source and why they'd be working on it without, any other plans about that. The other thing they learn is that when I say everything the Tuskers and the humans use is powered by this core energy, I do mean basically everything. I'd say it's the equivalent of electricity for us in real life, but they use it for stuff even we wouldn't. Like, for example, let's say I've got this bottle here and I went to tap it, and there'd be like a button here, and that would activate this core energy thing, which would automatically do this, like this. Now, that's important for something I'll get into in a minute, but I wanted to emphasize that. Now, there's one other interesting little tidbit here, and that is the fact that Rory couldn't sleep that night. The reason why is because, if you remember, any time Rory goes unconscious for any reason or is commanded to, he will revert into his Tusker form, because he's been he's been affected by one of the Tusker minds, and they haven't cured that yet. So, knowing that they are almost assuredly being watched, they decide that there's absolutely no way they can allow Rory to go to sleep. So he and Snarg basically takes first shift to keep him awake, and after a while of talking, Rory comes upon the idea to go ahead and just kind of start lightly boxing to keep the blood moving and whatnot. Well, Rory kind of knocks Snarg out by accident, and Snarg goes unconscious and falls asleep, and Rory's like, oh crap, and so Rory goes and rushes and wakes up Guido. And Guido, basically takes second shift to say, okay, yeah, I'll make sure you stay awake. So they succeed. Rory stays awake, but from this point on, Rory has to start making fortitude rolls rather regularly in order to stay conscious. So, here's where things get fun. On approach to the massive pyramid-like structure, whose architectural style is actually very similar to what the Tuskers have been making in general, they notice two things. One, oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I forgot one step. I forgot a step. I'm sorry. They go on the helicarrier, and before they go to the sanctum, they go to another place, the facility where Fear and Lassel had been taken. So they show up and arrive, and all the soldiers in the entire helicarrier go very stiff-backed and blank-faced. Some of the party members didn't actually realize what was going on at first. And then Fear and Lassel walks on board, alone, looking very agitated. And she's just, well, okay, let's go, all right? And she's like, well, what's going on? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I just got woken up by people shoving guns into my face. It's great. I'm wonderful. Can we go now? She doesn't say guns. She says weapons, but you get the point. And they're like, wait. What do you mean you're... And they look around and they realize that she is actually directly mind-controlling all of the people in the entire helicarrier, plus all the people in the prison facility simultaneously. Now, this was something that was really important to get across, because this is the moment in which the party really realizes what a scion can do to these people. This is probably the first moment at which the players realize the real threat a single scion presents to this entire society, and why they've been overreacting so hard. And several of the party members in character do say, oh my god, I can't believe you're doing this! This is horrible! No wonder they're so afraid of you! I never thought their fears were justified. And Fearness, I was like, what? They were trying to... I'm not trying to hurt them! And finally they convince her to go ahead and do this legitimately, because they're trying to make some headway with these people. Now, actually, that was a great move on their part, for reasons they don't even know yet to this day. But let's say that they just... By doing this action, they just knocked a domino over, and a lot of effects have changed because of that. So what happens is she goes ahead and says, fine, goes back out, goes back to her prison, lays down as though she's unconscious again, and erases the memories of everything that's happened from all the minds of the people involved. And again, yes, a Scion can just do that. Again, to get the point across. So after a little bit of time, you know, finally she's woken up and she's brought on board, bound and gagged by the troops, and she's just like, whatever, let's just get this over with, because she's just pissed at this point. And in fact, one thing that will become very common over the next several sessions is Fear Nacille's behavior is going to start changing slightly. So, we'll see. I'll look at that in a minute. But like I said, this is where things get really fun, because then they go to the Sanctum. Now, they notice that the front door has been blown inwards, and they realize that the way that the Tuskers and humans had gained entry was literally just by destroying the entrance. Now, that didn't mean much to the characters, but anybody who has been watching this so far would probably understand that that emphasizes the level of destructive power and technological advancement the Tuskers and the humans have in order to be able to violently overrule the weaving and the magery of what the Lady Airfall created when she created these sanctums. It's not an insignificant feat, in other words, is what I'm trying to get across here. However, they see something, I'm just going to quote myself here, they come across an incredibly crude construct, like something made by a child with blocks of metal just kind of clunked together and barely able to animate. It's just kind of doing this thing. It doesn't even have joints here. It's just, you know, arms, and it's just kind of waddling back and forth in between the thing. Now, the troops assume that this thing is just some kind of a children's toy that got loose, a robot, for example. And the party, of course, has never heard of a robot, so they're like, what? No, that's a titanium golem or something, which is, of course, an insanely ridiculously hideous risk. And so they're trying to warn these troops, you know, you have to be careful, you have to be cautious, you don't understand what this thing can do. And the troops are like, yeah, whatever. Now, it is worth noting the troops do go in alerted because of the warnings of the party. If it wasn't for that, things would have gone worse, because what happens is the toy turns, raises one of its cannon arms, and looses out a bolt of red and black lightning. And I hope you remember what that means. This red and black lightning kills 14 of the troops like that. One round. Gone. And there's not even ash left. There is literally nothing left of them. They are extinguished instantly. What ensued was an absolutely nightmarish battle in which the party was about a millimeter from dying horribly at any given round. Especially when Rory decided to go in and try to help out by shooting at the thing with his bow and arrow. I get where the character was going with that, but I admittedly, even though I said the safeties were off, I went ahead and flubbed a couple things here. So I guess the safeties were on just for like this one battle, just to make sure Rory didn't get extinguished in a way that was absolute. Sorry, Rory. But the thing literally is just barely destroyed. Now, I want to stress something. Some of you out there may have some experience or knowledge of the military of real life. Thankfully, several of my players did, because that meant it would be much easier for me to explain what happened. The helicarrier had something on board that I'm going to equate to a Vulcan. However, it had 8 of those. Those of you who don't actually know what I'm talking about, a Vulcan is death. It is one of the most horrifying weapons I have ever seen in my life. And yes, I've actually seen it in action in real life, and I was actually deaf for many hours after, even with the things on. Whew! So the helicarrier opens up with its Vulcans onto this thing, just full out, and the troops are fighting back with their weapons too, which are not insignificant either, I might add. However, it's still a close fight, and they still barely manage to get the thing to destroy. Now, what ends up happening is, this is fascinating. The destruction happens, and the explosion goes off, knocks a whole bunch of people back. The helicarrier falls out of the sky. Now, as they're looking around trying to figure out what's going on, something's wrong. Their armor won't unclinch. Their communicators won't work. The helicarrier is completely powered down. And I added one other tidbit. Earlier, Sethos managed to get a automatically core energy refilling pipe, okay, that would automatically generate more pipe weed for him to be able to smoke. Well, that's not working. None of their technology is working, and they find out that all the core energy has been blinked out by this destruction for some reason. Now, the party spends some time trying to figure this out, but they just have so little information, and so finally they're like, okay, whatever. we're going to go in there and finish our mission. We've already spent so much time. This is already dangerous. We need to go right now. The troops decide to go ahead and stay here because they are, A, completely terrified and completely shell-shocked by what just happened. Do keep in mind these people usually don't actually militarily fight much. Most of what they fight is ravenous, horrifying, eldritch creatures from beyond, from the Dyers, not a child's toy that nearly extinguished their entire force by itself. Easily. So they're a little shell-shocked, and they're going to go ahead and wait here because they know that if they don't communicate within a couple hours, one way or another, it would be automatic procedure for, command to send someone out and figure out what's going on. So they're going to stay here and hold watch. And then the party decides to go ahead and go into the Sanctum. Now, I was hoping to go ahead and talk about the Sanctum and the whirlwind of events that are about to happen, because from the moment they enter the Sanctum until events I don't want to spoil, is the grand total of about 5 hours of time. A lot happens in that 5 hours. So I think I'm going to go ahead and wait in that for the next video, so I hope to see you there.